The blood staining Xander Ashford's knuckles had barely dried when he looked up to see the most beautiful woman he had ever laid eyes on step down from the afternoon stagecoach in Wallace, Idaho. It was late September 1882, and the autumn air carried the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains as dust swirled around the wooden sidewalks of the mining town turned ranching community. He had just finished breaking up a fight between two drunken miners outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, earning himself a split lip and bruised ribs for his trouble. But all thoughts of pain vanished the moment his gaze locked on her. She wore a traveling dress of deep emerald that brought out auburn highlights in her chestnut hair, and even from across the dusty street, he could see the intelligence and determination in her eyes as she surveyed the rough frontier town with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Xander knew immediately who she had to be. Charles Montgomery, the owner of the Double M Ranch where Xander had worked as a ranch hand for the past 3 years, had mentioned his younger sister would be arriving from Boston to stay for an extended visit. What Charles had failed to mention was that his sister possessed the kind of beauty that could stop a man's heart cold in his chest. Xander wiped the blood from his hands onto his worn denim pants and straightened his hat, suddenly acutely aware of how he must look compared to the fine gentleman she was probably accustomed to back east. "You planning to stand there gawking all day, Ashford, or you going to help the lady with her trunk?" The gravelly voice belonged to Frank Peterson, the ranch foreman, who had driven the wagon into town specifically to collect Miss Montgomery from the stage depot. Xander snapped out of his stupor and hurried across the street, dodging a freight wagon hauling lumber from one of the nearby sawmills. Up close, she was even more stunning. Her eyes were the color of rich chocolate, framed by long lashes that cast shadows on her high cheekbones. She stood perhaps 5 feet 6 inches tall, with a figure that her modest traveling clothes could not quite conceal. When she turned those eyes on him, Xander forgot every word of English he had ever learned. "Miss Montgomery, I'm Xander Ashford, one of the hands at your brother's ranch. Welcome to Wallace." He managed to get the words out without stammering, which he counted as a personal victory. She extended a gloved hand, and he took it carefully, mindful of his roughness compared to her obvious refinement. "How do you do, Mr. Ashford? Please call me Caroline. I hope the journey from town to the ranch is not too arduous. I have been traveling for nearly a week and would dearly love to see my brother again." Her voice carried the cultured accent of the East, but there was warmth in it that put him somewhat at ease. "No, madam, it's about an hour's ride. The road is decent, and Frank here is the best driver in 3 counties. Frank grunted his acknowledgement while loading Caroline's substantial trunk into the back of the wagon. There were also 2 smaller bags and a hat box, all of which spoke of extended stay rather than brief visit. Xander helped Caroline up onto the wagon seat, his hands spanning her narrow waist for just a moment. The contact, even through layers of fabric, sent electricity racing through his veins. The ride out to the Double M took them through some of the most beautiful country in northern Idaho. The mountains rose on either side of the valley, their peaks still snow-capped even in late September. Stands of ponderosa pine and Douglas fir covered the lower slopes, while the valley floor opened into rolling grassland perfect for cattle. The Coeur d'Alene River sparkled in the distance, its waters cold and clear from mountain snowmelt. Caroline sat between Frank and Xander on the wagon seat, and Xander found himself hyper-aware of every small movement she made. She smelled of lavender and something else he could not quite identify, something essentially feminine and refined. He tried not to stare, focusing instead on the landscape around them, but his gaze kept drifting back to her profile as she took in the scenery with obvious appreciation. "It is magnificent," she said softly, more to herself than to either man. "Charles wrote about the beauty of this place, but I confess I thought he was exaggerating to convince me to visit. I see now he was understating the truth." "It's God's country, that's for sure," Frank agreed. "Your brother has built himself a fine ranch here. Started with nothing but determination, and a small stake he won in a poker game, if you can believe that. Now he runs 3,000 head of cattle on 10,000 acres, most successful operation in the county." Pride colored Frank's words, and Xander felt that same pride. He had been part of building the Double M into what it was today, even if his role had been modest compared to Charles Montgomery's vision and business acumen. The ranch employed 15 men full-time, with additional seasonal workers brought in during roundup and calving season. They had built a reputation for quality beef that reached as far as the markets in Spokane and even Portland. "Charles always did possess remarkable drive," Caroline said. "Even as children, when he set his mind to something, it was as good as accomplished. Our father despaired of his decision to come west, but I think Charles has proven himself admirably." The main ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise. It was a substantial 2-story structure built from local timber, with a wide front porch and real glass windows that caught the afternoon sun. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, including the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, the barn and stables, a smokehouse, and various storage sheds. Cattle grazed in the near pastures, their red and white hides standing out against the golden grass. Charles Montgomery must have been watching for them, because he emerged from the house before the wagon even came to a complete stop. He was a tall man in his late 20s, with the same chestnut hair as his sister and similar features that marked them clearly as siblings. Where Caroline possessed delicate beauty, Charles had rugged handsomeness and the powerful build of a man who worked alongside his ranch hands rather than simply giving orders. "Caroline." He reached up and practically lifted her from the wagon, spinning her around in an enthusiastic embrace. "Let me look at you. My God, you are even more beautiful than when I left Boston." "How is that possible?" she laughed, the sound like music to Xander's ears. "And you have become quite the frontiersman, brother. Look at you with your boots and that ridiculous mustache. Whatever would Mother say?" "Probably the same things she said when I announced I was heading west 6 years ago." Charles grinned, clearly delighted to have his sister here. "Come inside. Martha has prepared your room, and there is hot water for a bath if you would like to wash away the travel dust. We will have a proper dinner tonight to celebrate your arrival." As Charles guided Caroline toward the house, his arm around her shoulders, he called back over his shoulder. "Xander, Frank, thank you for collecting her. Xander, bring the trunk up to the guest room, would you? The one at the end of the upstairs hall." Xander nodded and grabbed the heavy trunk, hauling it out of the wagon with Frank's help. The older man shot him a knowing look as they carried it up the porch steps. "Best get those thoughts out of your head right now, boy. That woman is quality, and you are a ranch hand who earns $40 a month and owns nothing but the clothes on your back and that sorry excuse for a horse in the stable." The words stung because they were true. Xander had grown up on a small farm in Kansas, the youngest of 5 sons. With no land to inherit and no prospects at home, he had headed west at 18 to make his fortune. 4 years later, he had found steady work but little fortune. He was good at what he did, good with horses and cattle, good with a rope and fair with a gun when necessary, but that did not change his station in life. A woman like Caroline Montgomery was so far above him socially that pursuing her would be like trying to rope the moon. Still, as he carried her trunk up the stairs and into the room Charles had indicated, Xander could not stop thinking about her. The room was the finest in the house aside from Charles's own quarters, with a real four-poster bed covered in a beautiful quilt, a wardrobe, a dresser with a mirror, and even a small desk by the window. Lace curtains framed a view of the mountains in the distance. It was a room fit for a lady, which Caroline certainly was. He set the trunk at the foot of the bed and turned to leave, only to find Caroline standing in the doorway. Without her traveling coat and hat, he could see her figure more clearly. She was slender but curved in all the right places, with a narrow waist and full hips that made his mouth go dry. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford," she said, moving into the room with the natural grace of someone raised with deportment lessons. "I do appreciate your assistance." "It is just Xander, madam, and it is no trouble at all." He moved toward the door, needing to put some distance between them before he made a fool of himself. "Xander, then, and I meant what I said about calling me Caroline. I have a feeling formality will seem quite silly here in comparison to Boston society." She smiled at him, and the warmth of it nearly knocked him off his feet. "Will you be at dinner this evening?" He shook his head. "No, madam. Mr. Montgomery's dinners are family affairs. The hands eat in the bunkhouse." Something flickered across her face, disappointment perhaps, but it was gone too quickly for him to be certain. "I see. Well, I am sure I will see you around the ranch then. Charles has promised to show me everything tomorrow." "Yes, madam, I am sure you will." He touched his hat brim and made his escape, his heart hammering in his chest like he had just outrun a stampede. That night in the bunkhouse, stretched out on his narrow bunk, Xander stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about Caroline Montgomery sleeping in the big house. Tried and failed spectacularly. Frank's words echoed in his mind. He was right, of course. Xander had no business even looking at a woman like that, let alone entertaining foolish notions about courting her. She would stay for a few months, enjoy the novelty of ranch life, and then return to Boston to marry some wealthy businessman or attorney, someone of her own class and breeding. The thought made his chest ache in a way that was entirely unreasonable given he had only just met her. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost coating the grass in the pastures closest to the river. Xander rose before dawn as always, splashing cold water on his face from the basin in the bunkhouse before heading out to begin his daily chores. He worked quickly, checking on the horses in the near pasture, mending a section of fence that had come loose, and helping the cook bring in wood for the stove. By the time the sun crested the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he had already put in 2 hours of work. He was leading a mare with a stone bruise from the pasture to the barn when he saw Caroline emerge from the house. She wore a split riding skirt of dark brown wool, a cream-colored blouse, and a leather vest that accentuated her figure. Her hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and she wore sturdy boots rather than the delicate shoes she had arrived in. The transformation from Eastern lady to Western woman was startling and impossibly attractive. Charles walked beside her, pointing out various aspects of the ranch operation. They were too far away for Xander to hear their conversation, but he watched as they made their way toward the barn. He ducked inside, focusing on examining the mare's hoof and trying not to think about the fact that Caroline would be entering the barn at any moment. "And this is where we keep the breeding stock and any animals that need special attention." Charles's voice carried through the barn a moment before he and Caroline appeared. "We have 20 horses currently, including 4 excellent cutting horses and 2 new geldings I am training for ranch work. Xander here is our best horseman. If an animal can be gentled, he can do it." Xander straightened, cradling the mare's hoof, and nodded at Charles and Caroline. "Morning, boss, Miss Caroline." "Good morning, Xander," Caroline said, her eyes bright with interest as she looked around the barn. "What is wrong with this horse? Stone bruise, madam. She will be fine with a few days of rest and some poultice. Nothing serious." He lowered the hoof carefully and gave the mare a pat on her shoulder. Caroline moved closer, reaching out to stroke the mare's neck. The horse nickered softly and leaned into the touch, clearly enjoying the attention. "She is beautiful. What is her name?" "Rosie. She is one of our best, usually. Just got unlucky stepping wrong in the north pasture." Xander found himself relaxing slightly despite his determination to maintain proper distance. Something about the way Caroline interacted with the horse, with genuine interest and affection rather than fear or distaste, put him at ease. "May I see the others?" Caroline asked, looking at her brother. Charles laughed. "I should have known you would want to examine every animal on the property. You were always bringing home strays as a child, driving mother to distraction. Very well, Xander. Would you mind showing my sister the horses?" "I need to speak with Frank about the cattle. We are moving to the winter pasture next week." "Of course, sir." Xander's pulse quickened at the prospect of time alone with Caroline, even as his rational mind warned him against it. Charles left, and Xander led Caroline through the barn, introducing her to each horse in turn. She asked intelligent questions about their bloodlines, their temperaments, their roles on the ranch. It became clear quickly that she knew horses, really knew them, in a way that went beyond the casual riding most wealthy women learned. "You have real knowledge of horses," he observed as she examined the legs of one of the geldings Charles was training, running her hands down with the practiced ease of someone who had done it many times before. She glanced up at him with a slight smile. "My grandfather on my mother's side raised thoroughbreds in Virginia. I spent every summer there as a child, and he taught me everything he knew. I find horses much more agreeable company than most people, if I am being honest." "I know what you mean." The words escaped before he could think better of them, and he felt heat rise in his face, but Caroline just smiled wider. "Charles told me last night that you came west from Kansas 4 years ago, and that you have a gift with difficult animals. He said there is not a horse you cannot gentle, given time and patience." Xander shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "I just listen to them, I guess. Try to understand what they need, what frightens them. Patience goes a long way." "That is a rare quality," Caroline said softly, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Most men I have known possess precious little patience, especially with creatures they see as beneath them." Something in her tone suggested she was not just talking about horses anymore, and Xander found himself wondering what kind of men she had known back east, what had driven her to accept her brother's invitation to visit the rough frontier. They spent another hour together, and by the time Caroline returned to the house, Xander was hopelessly, utterly lost. Every moment in her presence only deepened his attraction, his fascination. She was beautiful, yes, but she was also intelligent, curious, kind, and possessed of a genuine warmth that had nothing to do with social obligation, and everything to do with her natural character. He was falling in love with her, and he knew with absolute certainty it was the worst possible thing that could happen to him. Over the following weeks, Xander found his life transformed by Caroline's presence on the ranch. She rose early every morning, much to her brother's surprise and occasional dismay, and involved herself in every aspect of ranch operations. She learned to milk the cows, to gather eggs from the chickens, to card wool from the small flock of sheep they kept for personal use. She rode out with the hands to check the cattle, sitting her horse with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle, and she sought out Xander's company with a frequency that both thrilled and terrified him. They fell into an easy pattern. Most mornings, she would find him in the barn or the corrals, and they would work together on whatever task he had been assigned. She proved an able assistant, quick to learn and unafraid of hard work. The other ranch hands watched with varying degrees of amusement and concern, but none said anything directly to Xander. Charles seemed pleased that his sister was enjoying ranch life rather than complaining about the rough conditions, as he had apparently feared she might. One morning in mid-October, about 3 weeks after Caroline's arrival, Xander was working with a young stallion Charles had purchased from a rancher near Spokane. The animal was magnificent, with a glossy black coat and powerful build, but he was green and nervous, shying at shadows and fighting the rope. Xander had been working with him for several days, gradually building trust, but progress was slow. Caroline arrived just as the stallion reared, yanking Xander forward. He held firm to the rope, speaking in low, soothing tones, letting the animal settle before trying again. "He is frightened," Caroline observed from her perch on the corral fence. "Yes, madam. Someone broke him rough, I think. Used force instead of patience. Now he expects every person to hurt him." Caroline was quiet for a moment, watching Xander work. Then she said, "Rather like people, I suppose. One bad experience and we expect everyone to treat us poorly." Xander glanced at her, catching something melancholy in her expression. "Did someone hurt you, Caroline?" She looked startled by his directness, then gave a small, sad smile. "Not physically, no, but there was a man in Boston, someone my father approved of very much. A banker named Theodore Whitmore. Wealthy, established, from an excellent family. We courted for nearly a year, and I believed we would marry. Then I discovered he was also courting 2 other women simultaneously, hedging his bets, as it were. When I confronted him, he saw nothing wrong with his actions. Said I should be grateful he was considering me at all, given my father's recent financial reversals." Anger surged through Xander, so hot and sudden it surprised him. "He sounds like a damned fool." Caroline laughed, the sound a bit watery. "Yes, well, I realized I needed to get away from Boston, from the social expectations and the fortune hunters circling my family now that we are not as wealthy as we once were. Charles's invitation was perfectly timed. I jumped at the chance to come west, much to my parents' distress." "I am glad you came," Xander said quietly, holding her gaze. "Even if I have no right to be." Something shifted in the air between them, something charged and unmistakable. Caroline climbed down from the fence and walked toward him, stopping just a few feet away. The stallion snorted nervously but held his ground, perhaps sensing the change in atmosphere. "Why would you not have the right, Xander?" He swallowed hard. "Because you are Charles Montgomery's sister, educated and refined, and I am a ranch hand who owns nothing and has no prospects beyond a monthly wage. Because you will return to Boston eventually, and I will still be here, mucking stalls and mending fences. Because there is a world of difference between us, Caroline, and pretending otherwise would be foolish." She stepped closer, near enough now that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "And what if I do not see such a great difference? What if I see a good man, honest and kind, who treats animals and people with equal respect? What if all the wealth and social position in the world matters less to me than finding someone genuine?" His heart hammered against his ribs. "Caroline, Miss Caroline, Xander." The shout came from the direction of the house. One of the younger hands, Tommy, was running toward them. "Mr. Montgomery needs you both. There is trouble." The moment shattered. Xander secured the stallion quickly and followed Caroline as she hurried toward the house, his mind reeling from what had almost happened, from the implications of her words. Charles stood on the front porch with Frank and several other men Xander did not recognize. As they drew closer, he could see the tension in Charles's face, the hard set of his jaw. "What is wrong?" Caroline asked, slightly breathless from the quick walk. "Rustlers," Charles said grimly. "Pete Jameson's ranch lost 50 head last night. 2 other small operations have been hit in the past month. The sheriff thinks there is an organized gang working the area, hitting ranches and driving the cattle over the border into Washington to sell. What are you going to do?" Caroline's voice was steady, but Xander could hear the worry beneath it. "We are organizing a watch, taking turns patrolling our boundaries at night. Frank will work out a schedule." Charles looked at Xander. "I am going to need everyone on this, including you. I know it means longer hours, but I cannot afford to lose cattle to these thieves." "Of course, boss. Whatever is needed." The next 2 weeks were grueling. Xander worked his regular day shifts, then rode patrol for 4 hours every night, watching the far reaches of the Double M property for any sign of rustlers. The October nights grew increasingly cold, and by early November, the first snow began falling in the mountains. The cattle grew restless, sensing the coming winter, and keeping them calm while also watching for thieves made every night tense and exhausting. He saw less of Caroline during this time, which was probably for the best given the dangerous direction his feelings had been heading. But he thought about her constantly, replayed their conversation in the corral over and over, wondered what might have happened if Tommy had not interrupted them. One night in mid-November, Xander was patrolling the northwest boundary of the ranch, an area of rolling hills and scattered tree cover that bordered a smaller property owned by a widow named Margaret Sullivan. The moon was 3/4 full, providing decent light despite the late hour. His horse, a steady gelding named Buck, moved quietly through the grass, ears swiveling constantly for any unusual sounds. They came upon the rustlers almost by accident. Xander had dismounted to check what he thought was a broken section of fence when he heard the low murmur of voices and the restless movement of cattle. He froze, every sense suddenly alert. Through a small stand of trees, he could see the dark shapes of men on horseback, perhaps 6 or 7 of them, hazing a small group of cattle through a gap they had cut in the fence. His first instinct was to ride back to the ranch for help, but by the time he returned with other men, the rustlers would be long gone with Montgomery cattle. He needed to slow them down somehow, or at least get a good look at them so they could be identified later. Xander moved quietly through the trees, staying in shadow, trying to count the men and assess the situation. The cattle were agitated, maybe 15 or 20 head, worth several $100s at market. The rustlers were working quickly but not quietly, confident in their remote location. He was circling around to get a better view when Buck stepped on a branch. The crack was sharp and loud in the cold night air. Several of the rustlers turned, and Xander found himself looking at 3 men with guns drawn. "Well, well," one of them said, a big man with a thick beard. "Looks like we got ourselves a cowboy playing hero. That is not smart, boy." Xander raised his hand slowly. "Do not do this. Mr. Montgomery will hunt you down. He has friends in the sheriff's office and resources you cannot imagine. Take these cattle and you will hang for it." The big man laughed. "Awful brave words for someone staring down 3 guns. Tell you what, boy, you turn that horse around and ride away, forget you ever saw us, and we will let you live. You try to be a hero and we will leave you for the coyotes. Your choice." Xander knew he should leave. He was outgunned and alone, and dying over a few head of cattle would be foolish. But anger burned in his chest, anger at these thieves who thought they could steal what others had worked so hard to build, and pride prevented him from just riding away. "I cannot do that," he said quietly. The big man's expression hardened. "Then you are a fool." The gunshot split the night. Xander flinched, expecting pain, but it did not come. Instead, one of the rustlers cried out and dropped his gun, clutching his shoulder. More gunshots followed, coming from multiple directions. The rustlers scattered, abandoning the cattle and spurring their horses into flight. Within moments, Charles Montgomery rode out of the darkness, rifle in hand, with Frank and 3 other ranch hands behind him. They had been patrolling another section and heard the commotion, arriving just in time. "You all right?" Charles demanded, riding up to Xander. "Yes, sir. They were cutting your fence, running off cattle. We saw." Charles looked in the direction the rustlers had fled. "Let them go for now. We will get the sheriff out here at first light to follow their trail. Get these cattle back in the pasture and mend that fence well enough to hold for tonight." As the other men moved to comply, Charles fixed Xander with a hard stare. "You were about 2 seconds from getting yourself killed. You should have ridden for help." "I know, sir. I am sorry." Charles's expression softened slightly. "You are brave, I will give you that, but bravery without sense just gets a man dead. Remember that." By the time Xander returned to the bunkhouse, dawn was breaking. He was exhausted, cold, and his hands shook slightly from the aftermath of adrenaline. He had come close to dying out there, closer than he wanted to admit. The thought made him think of Caroline, of all the things he wanted to say to her but had never found the courage to voice. He had just sat down on his bunk when the bunkhouse door opened. Caroline stood framed in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a thick shawl over her nightgown. Every man in the bunkhouse froze, shocked by a woman's presence in their space. "Xander," she said, her voice tight with emotion, "I need to speak with you." He stood, acutely aware of the other men watching. "Caroline, you should not be here. It is not proper." "I do not care about proper right now." She moved toward him, stopping directly in front of him. Her eyes searched his face, wide and worried. "Charles told me what happened. He said you almost got yourself killed." "I am fine," he said gently. "Just doing my job." "Your job is not to die for a few cattle." Her voice cracked, and he realized with shock that she was on the verge of tears. "When Charles told me you were facing down armed rustlers alone, I thought I could not," she broke off, pressing a hand to her mouth. Without thinking, Xander reached out and pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest, her body trembling. He was aware of every man in the bunkhouse watching them, aware this would be all over the ranch by breakfast, aware he was holding Charles Montgomery's sister in a way that was entirely inappropriate. He did not care. "I am all right," he murmured into her hair. "I promise, Caroline. I am fine." She pulled back slightly to look up at him, and the emotion in her eyes made his chest tight. "I was so frightened. The thought of something happening to you, of never seeing you again, she stopped, swallowing hard. "I think I am falling in love with you, Xander Ashford, and I do not know what to do about it." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect. Around them, he heard several sharp intakes of breath from the other hands. This was going to cause a storm of trouble, he knew. But looking down at Caroline, at the vulnerability and hope in her beautiful face, he could not bring himself to care about the consequences. "I am already in love with you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Have been since the moment I saw you step off that stage. But Caroline, I have nothing to offer you. I earn $40 a month. I own 1 horse and the clothes on my back. You deserve so much more than I can give you." "I do not want more," she said fiercely. "I want you, just you, exactly as you are." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "Your brother will never approve. Your family will disown you. Then I will be disowned." She placed her hands over his, holding them against her face. "I came west to escape a life that was slowly suffocating me. I found something here I never expected to find. I found you. I am not giving that up because society says we do not match." Xander was dimly aware of someone clearing their throat behind him. He turned to see Frank standing by the door, his weathered face carefully neutral. "Boy, you better go talk to the boss before this gets any more out of hand. And Miss Caroline, with all due respect, you need to get back to the house before every tongue in the county is wagging about your reputation." Caroline straightened, lifting her chin with the pride and dignity of her upbringing. "Let them talk. I am not ashamed of my feelings." "Maybe not," Frank said gently, "but you will make things harder for Xander if you are not careful. Go on now. Let the men handle this proper." She looked up at Xander, her expression torn. He nodded. "Frank is right. Go back to the house. I will talk to your brother. Promise me you will not let him talk you out of this. Promise me, Xander." "I promise," he said, knowing even as he spoke the words that he was committing himself to a path that could end in disaster. "I promise I will fight for this for us." She reached up and kissed his cheek, a touch so brief and sweet it made his heart ache, then turned and left the bunkhouse. The moment she was gone, the room erupted in voices. "Are you out of your mind? Montgomery is going to kill you. That woman is going to break your heart, boy." Xander ignored them all, grabbing a clean shirt and his better hat. If he was going to face Charles Montgomery and ask permission to court his sister, he was going to do it properly, looking as respectable as he could manage. Charles was in his study when Xander knocked on the door of the big house 20 minutes later. Martha, the housekeeper who had worked for Charles since the ranch was founded, answered and ushered him in with a knowing look that suggested the whole household was already aware of what had happened in the bunkhouse. "Mr. Montgomery will see you in his study," she said, leading him down the hall. Charles sat behind a massive oak desk, papers spread before him, a cup of coffee steaming at his elbow. He looked up when Xander entered, his expression unreadable. "Close the door," he said quietly. Xander did, then stood before the desk, hat in hands, feeling like a man awaiting judgment. In a way, he supposed he was. Charles studied him in silence for a long moment. Finally, he said, "My sister came to your bunkhouse this morning in her nightgown. I assume you know every ranch hand and household staff member is currently discussing this development." "Yes, sir, I do." "And I assume you know why she went there. What prompted such a shocking breach of propriety?" Xander met Charles's gaze steadily. "She was worried about me after what happened last night. She was scared I had been hurt." "Scared," Charles repeated, "because she has developed feelings for you." "Yes, sir. And you, what are your feelings regarding my sister?" Xander took a breath, knowing his next words would determine his future. "I love her, sir. I know I have no right to, that I am not worthy of her, but I cannot help how I feel. She is the finest woman I have ever known, and if you will permit it, I would like to court her properly." Charles leaned back in his chair. "You are right that you are not worthy of her, at least not in the eyes of society or my family back east. You are a ranch hand with no property, no education, no connections. My father would have you horsewhipped for even thinking about Caroline in romantic terms." The words stung, but Xander held his ground. "I know all of that, sir, but I am a good man. I work hard, I am honest, and I would do everything in my power to make her happy, to give her the life she deserves." "And what kind of life is that exactly? You earn $40 a month. You live in a bunkhouse. Even if I gave you a raise, you could not afford to support a wife of Caroline's breeding, not in any way she is accustomed to." "She says she does not care about that." "She says that now," Charles said, his voice hard. "Wait until the reality of poverty sets in. Wait until she cannot afford the luxuries she takes for granted. Wait until she starts resenting you for the life you cannot provide." Anger flared in Xander's chest, but he kept his voice level. "With respect, sir, I think you underestimate your sister. She is not some pampered society girl playing at frontier life. She has worked alongside me for weeks, doing hard labor without complaint. She knows what this life entails. She has been here 2 months, Charles shot back. That is not enough time to understand what she would be giving up. Marriage is not a romantic adventure, Ashford. It is a practical partnership that requires more than just affection to succeed. Xander's hands tightened on his hat brim. Then let me prove it. Let me show you I can provide for her, that I can build something worthy of her. I have saved almost every dollar I have earned in the 4 years I have been working. I have nearly $200 put aside. That is enough to stake a small claim, to start building something of my own. Give me a year, sir. 1 year to prove I can be the man Caroline deserves. If I fail, I will walk away and never bother her again. Charles looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You would give up your position here, risk everything on the possibility of building your own ranch. Yes, sir, she is worth that risk and more. The silence stretched. Finally, Charles stood and walked to the window, staring out at the ranch he had built through determination and hard work. When he spoke, his voice was softer. You know, I came west with less than you have saved. My father gave me $1,000 and told me not to come back until I had made something of myself. He did not believe I could do it, thought I would come crawling home within 6 months. Instead, I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I took risks, made sacrifices, and built the Double M into what it is today. I did it to prove I was more than just a privileged Eastern gentleman playing at being a rancher. He turned back to Xander. I see that same determination in you, that same willingness to work for what you want. But understand this, if I give you my blessing to court Caroline and you break her heart, there will be consequences. I may respect you, but she is my sister, and her happiness matters more to me than anything. Hope surged in Xander's chest. You are giving your permission. I am giving you a chance to prove yourself, the same chance someone once gave me. Charles moved back to his desk and sat down. Here is what I propose. I have been considering expanding the ranch's operations, starting a horse breeding program in addition to the cattle. You are the best horseman I have ever seen, Xander. I want you to run that program. I will provide the initial stock and the land on the eastern section of the property. We will work out a partnership agreement. After 5 years, if the operation is successful, you will own a percentage of it outright. Xander stared at him, barely able to believe what he was hearing. Sir, I do not know what to say. Say you will work harder than you have ever worked in your life. Say you will prove to me and to Caroline that you are worthy of her. Say you will give her the life she deserves, even if that life looks different than what my parents might have envisioned. Charles extended his hand across the desk. Say you will be the man I think you can be. Xander took his hand, gripping it firmly. I swear it, sir. I will not let you down. I will not let Caroline down. See that you do not. Charles released his hand and sat back. Now get out of here and go tell my sister. She has been pacing the upstairs hall for the past 20 minutes, driving Martha to distraction. Xander practically ran from the study, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Caroline stood at the end of the hall, still wearing her shawl over her nightgown, her hair a tumbled mass down her back. She looked young and vulnerable and achingly beautiful. Well, she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He closed the distance between them and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet. He said yes. He is giving me a chance to prove myself, to build something worthy of you. She threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. I told you I did not need you to be worthy, I just need you. I know, he murmured against her hair, but I need to prove it to myself as much as anyone else. I need to know I can give you the life you deserve. She pulled back to look at him, her hands framing his face. "You foolish, wonderful man. You not understand. You already give me what I need most. You see me, the real me, not just my family name or my social position. You treat me as an equal. You make me laugh. You make me feel alive in a way I never did in Boston. That is worth more than all the money in the world." He kissed her then, unable to help himself. It was their first real kiss, and it was everything he had imagined and more. Her lips were soft and sweet, and she kissed him back with a passion that made his head spin. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Caroline Sullivan." "Sullivan?" She laughed, puzzled. He winced. "Sorry. Sullivan is the widow who owns the property next to the section where I will be setting up the horse operation. I was just thinking, never mind. I love you, Caroline Montgomery. Is that better?" She laughed again, the sound pure joy. "Much better. And I love you, Xander Ashford, so very much." The next several months passed in a blur of activity. Charles was true to his word, providing Xander with 6 excellent mares and 2 stallions to form the foundation of the breeding program. They selected a section of land on the eastern portion of the ranch, near a spring-fed creek that provided year-round water. The land was beautiful, with good grass and natural shelter from wind and weather. Xander threw himself into the work with single-minded determination. With help from Frank and some of the other hands, he built corrals, a small barn, and a one-room cabin that would serve as his home. It was rough and simple, nothing like the big house where Caroline lived, but it was his. Every nail he hammered, every board he placed, was a step toward proving he could provide for the woman he loved. Caroline was with him nearly every day, helping with the work despite her brother's occasional protests. She proved surprisingly handy with tools, and her knowledge of horses was invaluable as they planned the breeding program. They spent long hours discussing bloodlines, temperament, and the qualities they wanted to develop. It was hard work, but working alongside Caroline made even the most grueling tasks feel like gifts. They courted properly, or as properly as frontier life allowed. Charles insisted on basic propriety, which meant they were never truly alone without Martha or one of the hands nearby. But they found moments, stolen kisses behind the barn, whispered conversations under the stars, hands held beneath the dinner table when Charles was not looking. Winter settled over northern Idaho with typical harshness. Snow piled deep in the mountains and covered the valley in a white blanket that made ranch work treacherous and exhausting. The cattle huddled in sheltered areas, requiring constant monitoring to ensure they did not freeze or starve. The horses needed extra feed and attention. Every day was a battle against the cold and the snow, but even the harsh winter could not dampen Xander's spirits. He was building something real, something that would last, and he was doing it for Caroline, to prove he was worthy of her love. Christmas came, and Charles surprised everyone by hiring a minister from Wallace to come out to the ranch and perform a service in the big house. It was a small gathering, just the ranch hands and household staff, but it felt festive and special. Caroline gave Xander a pair of leather gloves she had made herself, the stitching neat and careful. He gave her a carved wooden horse, one of the stallions, whittled during long evening hours in his cabin. She cried when she saw it, telling him it was the most beautiful gift she had ever received. The new year of 1883 arrived with bitter cold and another massive snowstorm that trapped everyone in their respective buildings for 3 days. When the storm finally broke, they emerged to a landscape transformed, everything buried under several feet of pristine white. It was beautiful and daunting in equal measure. In late January, word came from Boston. Caroline's father had written, a long letter that she read privately before sharing the contents with Charles and Xander. Her parents had heard about her relationship with a common ranch hand through some connection or another, and they were appalled. They demanded she return home immediately. They threatened to disown her if she persisted in this foolishness. They could not understand how their daughter could throw away her future on someone so far beneath her station. Xander watched Caroline's face as she relayed the letter's contents. She was pale but composed, her jaw set with determination. "What will you do?" he asked quietly, though he feared he already knew the answer. She would have to choose between her family and him, and he could not ask her to give up everything for a ranch hand with dreams but little else. "I will write back and tell them I am staying," she said firmly. "I will tell them I have found my place in the world and it is here with you. If they cannot accept that, then I will learn to live without their approval." "Caroline," Charles said gently, "think carefully about this. Once you make this choice, there may be no going back. Father is stubborn. If he disowns you, he may never relent." "Then he will not relent," she said, lifting her chin. "I am not going back to Boston to marry some man who sees me as a commodity, who values my family name more than me as a person. I am not going back to a life of suffocating propriety and empty social obligations. I am staying here where I can breathe, where I can be myself, where I am loved for who I am, not what I represent." She looked at Xander as she spoke those last words, and the love in her eyes made his throat tight with emotion. "Are you certain?" he asked, needing to hear her say it one more time. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." That night, alone in his cabin with a fire crackling in the small stove, Xander made a decision. He had been saving for a specific purpose, and the time had come to act on it. The next morning, he rode into Wallace and visited the general store, where he spoke with Illy Patterson, the owner. "I need a ring," he said. "The best you have. I am asking Caroline Montgomery to marry me." Illy, who had known Xander for years, grinned widely. "About time, boy. I have been wondering when you would get around to it." He pulled out a small box from behind the counter. "Came in on the supply wagon last month. Lady over in Spokane was selling off her mother's jewelry. I bought a few pieces, thinking they might appeal to the women folk around here." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold band with a small diamond at the center. It was not elaborate or expensive by Eastern standards, but it was beautiful, and Xander knew immediately it was perfect for Caroline. "How much?" $40. Xander winced. That was a month's wages, a substantial portion of his savings, but Caroline was worth that and so much more. "I will take it." He rode back to the ranch with the ring secured in his pocket, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. He had practiced his proposal 100 times in his head, but now that the moment was approaching, all his carefully planned words seemed inadequate. He found Caroline in the barn, grooming one of the mares. She looked up when he entered, her face lighting with a smile that never failed to make his heart skip. "You are back. I was beginning to worry the weather had delayed you." She set down the brush and moved toward him. "Did you complete your business in town?" "I did." He took her hands in his, suddenly more nervous than he had ever been in his life. "Caroline, there is something I need to say to you." She tilted her head, her expression curious. "What is it?" He took a breath and went to one knee right there in the barn, on the straw-covered floor. Her eyes went wide. "Caroline Montgomery, you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. You are intelligent, brave, kind, and more beautiful than any sunrise over these mountains. When I first saw you step off that stage, I thought you were too good for someone like me, and maybe you are. But you chose me anyway, saw something in me worth loving, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift. I do not have much to offer you." I have a small cabin and a horse breeding operation that is more dream than reality right now. But I have my love, and I swear to you, I will work every day to build a life that makes you happy. Will you marry me?" He pulled the ring from his pocket and held it up. Tears streamed down Caroline's face, but she was smiling, radiant with joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Xander, I will marry you. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him to his feet and into her arms, kissing him with a passion that made the world spin. They clung to each other in the quiet barn, the horses nickering softly around them, and Xander felt a sense of rightness settle into his bones. This woman, this moment, this life they were building together, it was everything he had ever wanted and more than he had dared to dream. They were married in March, as soon as the weather cleared enough for a minister to make the journey from Wallace. Charles gave Caroline away, walking her down the makeshift aisle in the ranch house parlor with obvious emotion. Her dress was simple, a cream-colored gown she had sewn herself with Martha's help, but she looked absolutely breathtaking. The ceremony was small, attended by the ranch hands and household staff, a few neighboring ranchers, and the widow Sullivan, who had become a friend to Caroline over the winter months. There was no one from Caroline's family in Boston, though Charles had sent word of the wedding. The lack of response spoke volumes about their disapproval. If Caroline was hurt by her family's absence, she did not show it. She glowed with happiness throughout the ceremony, her eyes never leaving Xander's face as they spoke their vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed his bride with all the love in his heart, and the assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed was lively and joyous. Martha had prepared a feast, and someone produced a fiddle. They cleared the furniture and danced late into the evening, Caroline laughing in Xander's arms as he spun her around the room. He was not a graceful dancer, but she did not seem to care, matching his enthusiasm if not his skill. Finally, as the evening drew to a close, they said their goodbyes and walked together to the small cabin that was now their home. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the velvet sky above them. Caroline shivered, and Xander wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the starlight. "Happier than I ever thought possible. This life, this place, it is everything I never knew I needed." He unlocked the cabin door and swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold. She laughed, her arms around his neck, and he set her down gently in front of the fire he had built earlier. The small space glowed with warmth and light, simple but cozy. "It is not much," he said, suddenly self-conscious about the rough furniture he had built, the plain curtains Caroline had sewn, the obvious poverty of their circumstances compared to what she had known in Boston. "It is perfect," she said firmly, cupping his face in her hands. "It is ours, and that makes it perfect." They made love for the first time that night, a tender and passionate joining that sealed their union more thoroughly than any words or ceremony could. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Caroline's head resting on his chest, his fingers trailing through her long hair. "I will prove I am good enough for you," he murmured. "Every single day I will prove it." She raised her head to look at him, her expression serious. "You already are good enough, Xander. You always were. But I will be by your side as you build your dreams, and I will prove to you that I am strong enough, brave enough to be a rancher's wife. We will prove ourselves to each other." He kissed her softly. "I love you, Caroline Ashford." "I love you too, so very much." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found their home in each other. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Spring arrived with its usual chaos of calving season and new growth. The horse breeding operation began in earnest, with 2 of the mares producing foals that showed exceptional promise. Xander worked from dawn until well past dark most days, but Caroline was always beside him, equally invested in making their venture succeed. She proved herself every bit as tough and determined as Xander had believed. She learned to assist with difficult births, spending nights in the barn when a mare was foaling. She kept meticulous records of bloodlines and breeding dates, her neat handwriting filling journal after journal. She broke ice on water troughs in freezing weather and hauled feed in the scorching heat of summer. The other ranch hands, initially skeptical of the Eastern lady playing at frontier life, came to respect Caroline deeply. She worked as hard as any of them, never complained, and possessed a quick wit that made her popular during meals and evening gatherings. She also proved to be an excellent cook, often preparing meals for Xander and any hands who were working the eastern section where their operation was based. In late summer, Caroline missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was stress or the hard physical labor, but when the pattern continued for 2 months, she shared her suspicion with Martha, who confirmed what Caroline had begun to hope. She was pregnant. Caroline told Xander one evening as they sat outside their cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. She was nervous, wondering how he would react to becoming a father so soon after their marriage. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." For a moment he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile spread across his face, so wide and joyful it transformed him. "Truly, we are going to have a child." She nodded, tears pricking her eyes at his obvious delight. "In the spring, Martha thinks, April or May." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he murmured into her hair. "My God, Caroline, I cannot believe it. We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not even begin to cover what I am feeling right now." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You have given me so much already. A home, a purpose, your love. Now this. I am the luckiest man who ever lived." Charles was equally delighted when they shared the news, immediately insisting that Caroline stop doing heavy labor. She protested, but both her brother and her husband were adamant. They would not risk her health or the babies for anything. "You can still keep the records and help with planning," Xander compromised. "But no more hauling feed or working with the horses physically. I will not take chances with you." She wanted to argue but could see the fear beneath his determination. He loved her so much, and the thought of losing her terrified him. So she agreed, shifting her role to management and planning while Xander hired an additional hand to help with the physical labor. Her pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. As her belly swelled with their growing child, Xander became even more protective, barely letting her out of his sight. She found it endearing and occasionally frustrating, but his devotion never wavered. They spent the long winter evenings in their cabin, making plans for their growing family. Xander began building an addition to the cabin, a second room that would serve as a nursery. Caroline sewed tiny garments and blankets, her hands busy with preparations even as her body grew heavy and awkward. In late March, with the snow still deep on the ground but the first hints of spring in the air, Caroline went into labor. Martha attended her, along with the widow Sullivan who had experience in midwifery. Xander paced outside in the cold for hours, praying harder than he ever had in his life, terrified he would lose Caroline, that something would go wrong. Finally, just as dawn broke over the mountains, he heard the thin wail of a newborn. His heart nearly stopped. Martha emerged from the cabin, her face creased in a tired smile. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy with his father's lungs, and Caroline is fine, tired but fine. You can go in now." Xander rushed into the cabin to find Caroline propped up in bed, exhausted and pale but glowing with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. As Xander approached, she pulled back the fabric to reveal a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. "Meet your son," she said softly, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. Xander sat carefully on the edge of the bed and reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. Immediately, miniature fingers curled around his thumb with surprising strength. The simple gesture broke something open in his chest, a flood of love so intense it made his eyes burn. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Caroline, he is absolutely perfect. Thank you for this gift." She leaned her head against his shoulder, both of them staring at the miracle they had created together. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Xander knew exactly what he wanted to call him. "James," he said. "James Charles Ashford, after your brother who gave us a chance when no one else would have." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "Charles will be so honored." "Yes, James, it is perfect." They sat together as the sun rose. A family now, 3 lives intertwined by love and hope and the promise of a future they would build together. Charles was indeed honored when he learned they had named the baby after him. He held his nephew with surprising gentleness for such a large man, staring down at the infant with open wonder. "He looks like you, Xander," he observed. "Poor child." "He has Caroline's eyes," Xander countered, though in truth the baby's eyes were still the indeterminate blue of all newborns. Over the following months, James grew rapidly, his presence transforming the small cabin into a true home. Caroline proved a natural mother, patient and loving but also practical. Xander discovered depths of devotion he had not known he possessed, willing to do anything, endure anything, to protect and provide for his family. The horse breeding operation continued to thrive. The foals from that first year were showing exceptional quality, and word was spreading among area ranchers about the stock Xander and Caroline were developing. They began receiving inquiries about purchasing foals, and even requests to breed mares to their stallions for a fee. The additional income, while modest, helped tremendously. In the fall of 1884, when James was 6 months old, a letter arrived from Boston. It was addressed to Caroline, and the handwriting was her mother's. She opened it with trembling hands while Xander watched, ready to comfort her if the contents were hurtful. The letter was an olive branch. Caroline's father had suffered a mild heart incident, nothing life-threatening but enough to shake him. In the wake of his illness, her parents had reassessed their priorities. They did not understand Caroline's choices, the letter explained, but they missed their daughter desperately. They wanted to know their grandchild. If Caroline was willing, they would like to visit in the spring, to see the life she had built and meet her husband and son. Caroline cried as she read the letter aloud to Xander. He held her as she wept, understanding that these were tears of relief and joy rather than sorrow. She had been brave in choosing her own path, but the break with her family had hurt more than she had let on. "What do you want to do?" he asked gently. "I want them to come," she said. "I want them to see how happy I am, how good this life is. I want them to know James and to see that I made the right choice, even if it was not the choice they wanted for me." "Then invite them," he said simply. "We will show them everything we have built. We will prove to them that love and hard work matter more than social position or wealth." Caroline's parents arrived in May 1885, traveling by train to Spokane, and then by stagecoach to Wallace. Charles collected them in the wagon and brought them out to the Double M. Xander and Caroline met them at the main house, with 14-month-old James in Caroline's arms. Martin and Elizabeth Montgomery were exactly what Xander had expected. Elegant, well-dressed, clearly uncomfortable with the rough frontier surroundings. They looked at Xander with barely concealed skepticism, and he could read the question in their eyes. This was the man their daughter had thrown away her future for. But then James reached out his chubby arms toward his grandmother with a delighted laugh, and something in Elizabeth Montgomery's expression softened. She took the baby carefully, and James immediately grabbed her necklace, gurgling happily. "He is beautiful," Elizabeth whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "Caroline, he is absolutely beautiful." Over the following week, Caroline showed her parents everything. She took them through the horse operation, explaining the bloodlines they were developing, the business plan they had created. She showed them the cabin Xander had built, the addition he had constructed for James's nursery, the small vegetable garden she had planted. She introduced them to the other ranch families, to Martha and Frank and the widow Sullivan. Xander worked harder than ever during that week, rising before dawn and working until dark, determined to show Martin Montgomery that he was no lazy fortune hunter but a man willing to do whatever it took to provide for his family. He was respectful but not subservient, answering Martin's pointed questions about finances and future plans with honest, detailed responses. The turning point came on the 4th day of the visit. Martin had risen early and found Xander in the barn, already working despite the early hour. He watched in silence as Xander expertly treated a mare's infected hoof, his touch gentle but sure. "You are good with horses," Martin observed. "Thank you, sir. I have always had an affinity for them." "Caroline tells me this operation was Charles's idea, that he gave you the opportunity to prove yourself." "Yes, sir. Your son is a good man and a better friend than I deserved. He took a chance on me when he had no reason to." Martin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I owe you an apology, Mr. Ashford. I judged you without knowing you. I assumed the worst, that you had seduced my daughter for her family connections or from base motives. I see now that I was wrong." Xander looked up, surprised. "Sir, I have watched you this week. Watched the way you work, the way you treat my daughter, the way you love your son. I have watched how the other men here respect you, how your neighbors speak well of you. But most of all, I have watched Caroline. She is happier than I have ever seen her, truly happy in a way she never was in Boston. You did that. You gave her a life she chose for herself, a life she loves. That is worth more than all the society marriages in the world." Emotion tightened Xander's throat. "I love her, sir, more than anything. I will spend my life proving I am good enough for her." Martin stepped forward and extended his hand. "You already have, son. You already have." They shook hands, and in that moment, Xander felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had not realized how much Martin Montgomery's approval had mattered until he received it. When Caroline's parents left a few days later, the parting was tearful but joyful. Elizabeth held James for a long time, whispering to him, before finally handing him back to Caroline. "You will write?" Elizabeth asked, gripping her daughter's hands. "Every week," Caroline promised, "and you will visit again." "Try to keep us away," Martin said gruffly, pulling Caroline into an embrace. "You are our daughter, and that boy is our grandson. You are family, distance be damned." He shook Xander's hand firmly. "Take care of them." "With my life," Xander promised. As the wagon disappeared down the road toward town, Caroline turned to Xander with tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling, radiant with happiness. "You did it," she said. "You won them over. My father actually likes you." "We did it," he corrected, pulling her and James into his arms. together just like everything else. The years that followed were full and rich. The horse breeding operation grew steadily, becoming a significant source of income. By 1888, they had expanded to include 20 breeding mares and 3 stallions, and their horses were sought after throughout Idaho, Montana, and Washington. They hired 2 full-time hands to help with the operation, which had outgrown what Xander and 1 assistant could manage. In the spring of 1887, Caroline gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Emma. She had Caroline's chestnut hair and Xander's blue eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she owned her father's heart completely. James, now 3, took his role as big brother seriously, constantly checking on the baby and bringing her his toys. They built a proper house, larger and more comfortable than the original cabin, with 4 bedrooms and a real kitchen. It was modest by Eastern standards, but felt like a palace to Xander, who still remembered the small farmhouse in Kansas where he had grown up sharing a room with 4 brothers. Caroline's parents visited every year, and the relationship between Xander and his in-laws grew warmer with each visit. Martin began giving advice on business matters, using his financial connections to help Xander secure better prices for his horses. Elizabeth showered the grandchildren with gifts and affection, making up for lost time. In 1889, Charles Montgomery got married himself to a schoolteacher from Spokane named Helen. The wedding was a grand affair by frontier standards, and Xander stood up as Charles's best man, a gesture that spoke volumes about how far their relationship had come. What had started as employer and employee had transformed into genuine friendship and family. The 1890s brought new challenges and triumphs. A harsh winter in 1892 killed several cattle throughout the region and tested everyone's resolve. But the Ashford horse operation survived largely intact thanks to careful preparation and the sheltered location of their barns. In 1894, Caroline gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Matthew. With 3 children, the house was always full of noise and laughter, mess and joy. James grew into a strong, responsible young man who loved working with the horses as much as his father did. Emma proved to be the family scholar, always reading, constantly asking questions about everything. Matthew was still a toddler, but already showed signs of inheriting his mother's determination and his father's gentle way with animals. One evening in the late summer of 1895, Xander and Caroline sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains. James was in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. Emma was inside practicing her letters, and Matthew was asleep in Caroline's arms, his small body warm and heavy with the boneless relaxation of exhausted childhood. "You ever regret it?" Xander asked softly, the question that still occasionally haunted his thoughts. "Giving up your life in Boston, all the things you could have had." Caroline looked at him with such love and certainty that his doubts evaporated like morning mist. "Never. Not for one single moment. This life, this family, this love we have built together, it is worth more than all the wealth and status in the world. You gave me freedom, Xander. Freedom to be myself, to build something with my own hands, to love and be loved without pretense or social games. How could I ever regret that?" He took her free hand in his, lacing their fingers together. "I spent so many years trying to prove I was good enough for you, trying to build something worthy of what you gave up for me. And I spent those same years trying to prove I was strong enough to be your partner, that I was not some fragile Eastern lady who would break under the weight of frontier life." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "I think we can both stop trying to prove ourselves now. We have built an incredible life, raised beautiful children, created something lasting. We proved everything we needed to prove. Together, he said, echoing the word that had become their touchstone over the years. Together, she agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their land turn golden in the fading light. From the barn, they could hear James talking to the horses in the same gentle tones his father used. Through the open window came Emma's voice as she read aloud to herself. Matthew stirred in Caroline's arms but did not wake, safe and secure in his mother's embrace. Xander thought about that young ranch hand who had looked at a beautiful woman stepping off a stagecoach 13 years ago and dared to dream of something impossible. He thought about every challenge they had faced, every obstacle they had overcome, every moment of doubt and determination that had brought them to this point. He had set out to prove he was good enough for Caroline Montgomery. What he had discovered instead was that they were good enough for each other. Two people who had chosen to build a life based on love and respect and partnership rather than social expectations or material wealth. It was more than enough. It was everything. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Xander pulled Caroline closer, careful not to disturb the sleeping child in her arms. She turned her face up to his, and he kissed her softly, a kiss that held 13 years of love and the promise of many more to come. "I love you, Caroline Ashford," he murmured against her lips. "I love you, Xander Ashford," she whispered back. "Today, tomorrow, always." Inside the house, Emma called out that she had finished her lessons. From the barn came James's excited shout that the mare was in active labor. Matthew woke with a small cry, needing attention. Their life was full and busy, loud and chaotic, and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. Together, they rose to meet it, side by side as they always had been and always would be. Two people who had found their home in each other, who had built something lasting and beautiful out of love and determination and faith in what they could create together. In the end, Xander had not just proven he was good enough for Caroline. He had helped her prove to herself that she was exactly where she belonged, living exactly the life she was meant to live. And that was the greatest triumph of all.